Okay, well, we've probably still got a few people that will join us, but in the interests of keeping to our time, I will hand over to our chair and host today, Kerry Hayes. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks very much. And thank you to everybody for joining us so far. As Emily said, I think 127 people registered. So that's fantastic to see so much interest in this part of the Devon Carbon Plan. So as Emily said, my name's Kerry. I'm a project manager at Regen. And for those of you that don't know who Regen are, we are a not-for-profit organisation based here in Devon with a mission to decarbonise our energy systems in a more democratic and decentralised way. So I'm going to be the host for today, but I'm joined by a fantastic panel of people who you're going to hear from shortly. So, there we go. So the people that I've got joining me today are Kate Royston, who's the Director and Energy Advisor at Tamar Energy Community. We've got Sophie Phillips, who's Chair of South Dartmoor Community Energy. We've got Ian Bailey, who's Professor of Environmental Politics at the University of Plymouth. And then we've got Emily Reid, who's the Project Manager for the Devon Climate Emergency, and Hannah Oliver, who's Communications Lead for Devon Climate Emergency. So you'll be hearing from everybody else shortly. We are using the chat function today, so if you've got questions for any of our panel, please pop them in the chat function. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in there, say hello, share any useful links that you want to share to the discussion, any thoughts and feelings that you've got about any of this. And please note we are planning on circulating the chat with the notes from today, so it will be available to everybody following the event, including people who haven't been able to join us today. We are going to do a couple of quick polls as well as we're going through this, just to make sure that you're all listening and all engaged. So please do participate in those when Emily asks you to. And we are recording this session. So if you don't wish for your face to be seen on the recording, which will be shared on the website as well as via email to those who've registered, then please feel free to keep your camera off and please stay on mute for the duration of the webinar as well. So that, I think, Emily, is all of the housekeeping for now. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Kerry.
So the structure of today's session then, so Emily's going to give us a bit of a background to the climate emergency and explain an introduction to the Interim Devon Carbon Plan and how we've got to where we are so far. I'm then going to talk us through what needs to happen with regards to energy before we move into the keynote discussion with the panel that I've just outlined. And then we'll have time for questions and answers from the audience before we finally wrap up with the next steps. So I'll hand over to Emily now.
Great, thank you. So we've got a quick poll just to find out who is in the room and what your interest is. So you should be able to see the poll now.
If we're none of these,
put interested individual, unless you're a disinterested individual.
I don't have that option.
There should be a few more options, perhaps if you scroll down.
I don't seem to be able to do that.
Oh.
Perhaps it's probably me, I suspect.
Right, I think most of you have managed to vote now, so I shall share the results. Apologies to those of you who found the interface challenging. So great to see that we've got a lot of interested individuals in the room. Sort of 46% identify as interested individuals, but we've also got representation from local community energy companies, as well as some more regional energy company employees and individuals from councils, as well as energy policy organisation individuals and some landowners. So we've got a really interesting spread of individuals for the conversation today, so we can have quite a well-rounded conversation. That's brilliant. Great. So if it's okay with you, Kerry, I'll introduce the partnership.
Great, thank you, Emily. Sorry, I struggled to take myself off mute there. Thank you.
So the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership has an overarching goal to create a resilient net zero carbon Devon where people and nature thrive. And then there are 3 sub-objectives to that. So reducing carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 at the latest. So net zero being where any remaining emissions of greenhouse gases are balanced by the drawdown of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere by things like trees. And we'll need to improve the resilience of Devon's environment and prepare our communities for a warmer world, because we are locked into a certain amount of climate change already. So you can see on the right there that the partnership is quite a broad group of organisations, all of the local authorities in Devon, as well as some private companies and emergency response organisations, as well as environmental organisations. So a really good mix represented. The project is managed by a series of working groups. The response group is strategic level decision making with CEO and director level representation from the partners, supported by a tactical group of staff and officers from the partners. And one of the first things that tactical group did was draft a Devon Climate Declaration, which outlines the commitments of the partnership, and obviously the primary commitment being to respond to the climate emergency and reduce the emissions of both the organisations themselves and Devon as a whole. And you can read that on our website. So the tactical group is a knowledge sharing and update space for staff from the partners. Then there's 2 work streams: the mitigation, so emissions reduction, and adaptation. The mitigation work stream is led by a volunteer task force of 15 individuals, the Net Zero Task Force, and they bring together a range of expertise and are chaired by Patrick Devine-Wright, who is both a professor at X University and a lead author on the UN IPCC report on climate change. And the Net Zero Task Force have produced the Interim Devon Carbon Plan that we're discussing today and out for consultation at the moment. The Climate Impacts Group is chaired by Helen Dobby from the Environment Agency and works regionally with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly to look at how we need to adapt to, as I said, those inevitable impacts of the climate change that we're already locked into. So in the development of the Interim Devon Carbon Plan, there has been an evidence gathering phase already that incorporates a call for evidence, of which there were almost 900 responses from the public with suggestions of what needs to happen to achieve net zero in Devon, as well as a youth parliament event with 15 schools that attended that, and thematic hearings, which are a series of meetings, roundtable meetings that brought together expertise on themes such as energy to suggest what needs to happen. And this is synthesised and reflected in the Interim Devon Carbon Plan that is out for consultation at the moment. We had hoped to hold a citizens' assembly prior to the drafting of the report. However, the pandemic has meant that that's been delayed till later this year. And so instead, the Interim Devon Carbon Plan signposts some of the issues that may be discussed by the Citizens' Assembly because they are more challenging and more controversial and therefore deserve further deliberation. The Citizens' Assembly, people will be invited to it to reflect the demographics of Devon, so you won't be able to volunteer for it. It will be put together to ensure a broad range of representation of different people across Devon, and the recommendations from the Citizens' Assembly will inform further actions to join those outlined in the Interim Devon Carbon Plan. So it's important to remember as well that there are national plans as well as district and organisational plans on achieving net zero. So this is a strategic county wide plan. So the plan describes what needs to be done to reach net zero, and in the first instance assumes that this is by 2050 and indicates the costs, opportunities and co-benefits of doing so. But it also outlines the difficulties of achieving net zero ahead of the national timetable, i.e. 2050, if we were to try and go for 2030 or 2040 in Devon. And this is something that we really want your opinion on, so have a look at the arguments of why that might be challenging, and let us know through the consultation what date you would like to see. The plan makes clear that we will need additional resources as a county to fulfil this plan. We're very clear about that. We've signposted which actions, what the funding status of actions are. Most of them do need new resources, but there are opportunities to switch existing spending, for example, by switching your existing energy provider. We're very clear that Devon is a rural county, and that's got both opportunities and challenges, and some actions will be easier within our towns and cities, and some actions will be only possible in our rural areas, and we've tried to indicate that. So there are lots of benefits that we can achieve whilst pursuing net zero. We think Devon as a result can be fairer, healthier, more resilient and more prosperous as a society, and that we will achieve better health and well-being through our improved diets, warmer homes and more active lifestyles, that prosperity can be achieved through new jobs and skills and retaining spending locally, and that addressing net zero, achieving net zero will also help to enhance and regenerate nature and reduce flood risk and improve water and air quality, amongst many other benefits. So back to you, Kerry.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thanks for explaining how we've got here. I think it's important to note that this has taken quite a long time to get to where we are now. So the task force has been working together for over a year to pull together all of the evidence and all of the expertise required to produce this plan. So it has been quite an involved process. I've just been watching the number of participants to tick up, and it's really exciting that there are now 88 people on here, just to show the level of interest in this part of the plan. So I'm really enthused by that. So the energy section of the plan, so what do we need to do? Well, it's quite simple in that we need to increase renewable energy, we need to introduce flexibility into our system, and we need to then capture the little bit of carbon that's left. So while that's quite a simple headline, I'm just going to talk through over the next few slides sort of how we might go about doing that, and the benefits that will be realised to our communities for doing that. And there's a stat up there on the slide that says that, back in 2018, 62% of Devon's greenhouse gas emissions were related to energy use through electricity, fossil fuel, buildings, manufacturing, construction activity and transport. But it's important to note that we not only need to increase the renewables to decarbonise those emissions, we're going to need to increase the amount of electricity that we generate to decarbonise other parts of our sector, such as the transport sector and heating. So based on that, we're going to need about 2.5 times as much electricity as we currently do. So it has to come from renewable energy sources. So the 4 key areas, and these came out of the thematic evidence sessions and also the call for evidence. The 4 key ways we're going to do this are firstly by using less energy. Just seen that pop up in the chat. That is sort of number 1. So it's recognise that we need to reduce our energy consumption and then use what we do need to use as efficiently as possible. So by improving our building stock and by changing behaviour in order to see that happen. Recognising that we do still need energy, the rest of it we need to transition to renewable energy. So there are a couple of examples on there, but that's not it's not an exhaustive list. So there are also innovative technologies such as wave and tidal energy. There's floating offshore wind, which isn't mentioned, as well as more sort of traditional and well-known sources as wind, solar and biofuel. We then need to be able to use the electricity that we're generating more flexibly. And by that, I mean, there are times when perhaps the generation profile of renewable energy doesn't always match up with the demand profile. So we need to be able to store that electricity for times when it's more appropriate. And then finally, where we are not able to decarbonise the system, so perhaps large industrial users, we need to be able to capture the carbon that's emitted from those fossil fuels that we can't completely remove. if you move to the next slide. Thanks, Emily. Okay, so through doing this, the key outcomes, clearly to start with, we're going to have a greater amount of renewable electricity, which is going to bring with it significant increases in jobs and skills opportunities. We're going to have realised a number of the innovation opportunities, such as testing the offshore technologies that I've just mentioned, so wave and tidal energy, where we've got opportunities for those, also potentially hydrogen infrastructure, and the development of floating offshore wind, because although offshore wind is quite a developed technology, floating foundations are still relatively innovative. Our communities are going to become more engaged in local issues and energy investment, and we're going to see that much more development, in the use of district heating systems fueled by zero carbon fuels, and they'll be used for sort of housing developments and buildings. So focusing on benefits other than just clean electricity, if we manage to transition to a net zero energy system, we're going to see significant financial returns on investment in new renewables, which could be spent back in our local economy. We're going to see, at the moment, over £2 billion a year leaves the Devon economy on energy spend. And if we can capture some of that within our boundaries, that could be reinvested in our local communities and in our local economy. We're going to hear from two speakers on community energy groups later, Kate and Sophie, who will talk a little bit more about the schemes that community energy groups are already doing and demonstrating how these surplus investments can be reinvested in the community. So I will just gloss over point 3. But we will ultimately, sorry, Emily, could I just go back one? But ultimately, we know that when communities own key infrastructure to be more self-sufficient and have greater resilience, they can be more cohesive, and this is only ever going to be a positive thing. Thanks, Emily. So I mentioned that there can be new jobs created. Some of these will be replacing displaced jobs, but we could see up to 192,000 jobs across Devon, Cornwall, Dorset and Somerset. These can be jobs replacing traditional jobs in, for example, gas boilers. These could well be transitioning over to reskilling into electrical trades and other opportunities for high-skilled jobs. And as I just said, over £2 billion a year leaves our local economy on energy spend, and we'll be able to retain a much greater proportion of that within our local economy. And then there are the co-benefits. So I think we'd all agree we'd like less air pollution, we'd like to be able to breathe that a little bit easier. But more importantly, we'd like to see reduced levels of fuel poverty. It's important to note that people in fuel poverty are mostly not just in fuel poverty, they're in poverty, and we need to find ways of supporting these people. And this is a great way that we can do that and really help people out. And there are greater public health benefits, so we can help improve people's housing, which can help reduce illnesses that are related to those cold, damp homes. And we can also, relating back to that very first point that I said, by using more smart meters and time of use tariffs, we can actually help to reduce some of that energy that's wasted and help keep bills lower for the consumer as well. Okay, so Emily's just going to put a poll up there. We're just interested to know, whether or not you, what you think about those, and if you think we've selected the right areas as our key areas to focus on. So you're welcome to select more than one if you think that some of them are of equal importance, but which of those do you think is the key priority out of the 4 that I outlined? I just would like to add, I'm seeing lots and lots of comments popping up about retrofitting homes. Absolutely incredibly important. I'm not going to be focusing on that much during this session, largely because we have had to split the plan out because there's so many areas that we're trying to cover across the Devon Carbon Plan. Most of that was covered in the building session, and I will get Emily to remind me when that was, and perhaps we could circulate the link to that in the follow-up email so that you can see that session. But it's certainly not something that's been excluded from the plan. It's just on this, we're not necessarily focusing on it right here.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. That's a really important point. And do go to our website we can put a link in the chat. We've got a YouTube channel with all of the recordings of the webinars that have happened already.
Yeah, and as well, it's probably also then just for completeness worth saying again the transport aspects, so electric vehicles and such. That was all covered in our mobility webinar, which was a couple of months ago as well. So although clearly electricity is important in both of those and energy is important in both of those, they were covered in much more depth in their own webinars.
So I think most people have voted, so I'm going to share the poll results now. So you should be able to see them now, Kerry.
Great, yeah. So yeah, so I think that's kind of what I expected to see, really, transitioning to renewables and using less energy pretty much neck and neck there. And yes, carbon capture and storage, as expected, has kind of been the least important, I guess. It is just, again, worth stressing that that isn't a priority for us, but it is worth noting that at some point we will have to deal with those bits of the sector that we can't decarbonise, or sorry, of the economy that we can't decarbonise. I think at the moment in Devon, and maybe Emily might correct me, there's a stat in the plan. I think emissions from large industry in Devon only accounts for something like 1% of our emissions a year. I think that's right, Emily. So I don't think carbon capture and storage is something that we're seriously considering as a big part of our strategy moving forward. But I think we have to recognise that.
Yeah, that's why it's really reducing as much as possible, and then only using it as a last resort.
Yeah. Sorry, just again, sorry, I'm now seeing agriculture popping up as well. Perhaps I should have explained at the beginning. So the plan has been broken into lots of different sections, and agriculture was largely covered in the food, land and sea area. So we have had to split the massive task of decarbonising Devon up into sort of different chunks so that they are a bit more manageable to work with. Just for the process of preparing the plan and presenting information. So there is again a section on food, land and sea, which I believe was yesterday. Is that right, Emily? Which
it was earlier this month actually, but again the recording is on the YouTube channel, and there's lots of information about it on our website.
Okay, fantastic. So if I could now bring in my panel members. So I'd like to, if Kate, Emily and Ian could take themselves off mute. I'd like to first ask you to introduce yourselves. So if just in 1 minute you could try and sum up your work and why you've been asked to speak here today. And then we'll go into a couple of questions before we move to the audience. So if I could ask Sophie to start, please.
Hi everybody, so I'm Sophie Phillips. I'm one of the founder directors of South Dartmoor Community Energy. We're based in Ivybridge and we do work across the South Hams and mainly in our kind of Ivybridge area. We've been asked to speak because although we don't own any renewable generation, we've been doing a lot of work on fuel poverty and energy advice projects since we set up in 2016. We've now got a really exciting eco-affordable housing project, which is currently in planning, which kind of tackles all of these aspects that we're talking about, looking at transport poverty, super efficient passive house buildings, so they use less energy, community PV, and kind of balancing it all and being flexible on site as well, for how we provide new housing for local people.
Great. Thank you, Sophie, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment. Kate, could I ask you to speak next, please?
Hi, I'm Kate Royston from Tamar Energy Community, founder member, and we were a spin-off, if you like, from Transition Tavistock back in 2014. So we've been working on energy-related things in the area since about 2009, and our area is West Devon and South East Cornwall. So we do work in a number of areas, including energy advice services. We have rooftop solar installations, about 327 kilowatts, and we're adding a bit more to that. I've had a recent share offer. We've done some interesting innovation work called Open LV, or the Power in Your Hands, which is looking at helping householders understand more about patterns of energy usage. We are currently working on a renewable heat project with the Mount Kelly Foundation, which is very exciting. I'm also a board director of Devon Energy Collective, and I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. And we need to make sure that we talk a little bit later as well about the Devon Community Energy Network.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Kate. And Ian, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Ian Bailey, and I'm Professor of Environmental Politics at the University of Plymouth. I've been working on climate and energy issues across a range of areas for around about 20 years now, most of it at the kind of national policy level, but some of it at a more localized level. So in particular, I've had interest in the use of financial incentive instruments to stimulate emissions reductions and renewable energy deployment. I've been part of a kind of, if you like, a cog in the wheels of quite a lot of large projects looking at the deployment of marine energy technologies, quite a lot of focused around the Cornish Wave Hub when it was first introduced, and my role there has been significantly oriented towards looking at social attitudes towards marine energy deployment, and also been involved in some research on debates on procedural justice in wind energy siting at a more localized level. I have worked to a lesser extent probably overall on energy demand issues, particularly the concept of energy literacy among young people. I see some of my co-authors are actually in the audience today, good to see you. And the effects of different incentives and interventions to try and promote energy saving behaviours, particularly amongst young people. So, and welcome everybody today.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. So we've got a couple of points I'd like to discuss then with members of the panel. So first of all, Kate, could you just outline a little bit more about what the Devon Energy Collective is and the benefits of that approach for reducing carbon across the county, please?
Yeah, so Devon Energy Collective is a CIC, so community interest company, which is owned by a number of the community energy companies, benefit societies across Devon, and our aim really is to be able to develop renewable energy on a larger scale, and the ambition really is to see so the aim is to enable as much of the energy that's needed within Devon to be generated within Devon and ideally community owned, so that much more of the benefit remains within the county. Great.
Thank you. Did anybody else from the panel want to add anything on that point? And when you say just benefits then, Kate, what sort of benefits do you see being realised from these projects that we do see the opportunity to keep within the county? What specific examples could you bring to that?
There are quite a range of benefits. When a project is community owned, then we would generally try and work with as many local providers as possible, and so the economic benefits would retain within the county. There would be opportunities for community ownership, which means that there's a much closer attachment to, people feel as though that they have a part, and the participation within it is much more democratic. And it also means that any surpluses that are generated are retained within the community. And the ambition really is to look to see whether or not the surpluses that could be generated from larger scale renewables could be reinvested into important agenda of retrofitting homes across Devon.
Yeah, perfect. I think I'd like to bring Sophie into the discussion there. So talking about that reinvesting surplus into the community and working with people's homes, would you be able to just outline a little bit about the work that you've been involved with there?
Sure. So I mentioned at the beginning that we've been involved in a lot of energy advice projects. We weren't able to have our own renewable energy generation project, so all our energy advice work has had to be grant funded. But we've managed to secure grants to do this, and created jobs as well. So my job didn't exist. It's community energy that's created my job, which is part a job and part voluntary. But the great thing about community owned renewables is that the income generated from those projects would create a long-term sustainable income for fuel poverty projects to help us. So for example, we go out and visit people in their homes and help them set up their heating systems better. We speak to their energy suppliers and sort out issues. So the benefits are not just environmental. So from the community energy sector, the health and social care and the well-being benefits to people all across the county are massive. Sorry, Ian, you noticed you had your hand up then.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of mention that kind of the things that Sophie and Kate are talking about, how important they are, you know, just kind of thinking about how much climate change as a standalone agenda kind of sits on people in people's lists of priorities, and kind of, yeah, it's something which people recognize as important when they're thinking about it, but this and actually kind of even kind of energy saving is something which is very easy to go into the background of people's consciousness. So kind of focusing on kind of strategies which kind of try to appeal too much to the or only to the climate agenda, you know, could have difficulties in gaining large amounts of traction. But the sorts of kind of works where it's really relating energy and climate to people's everyday lives and the circumstances, working with them, kind of not just about messages, but also in terms of practical support that are really, really important. You know, we do have to remember, I think it's something like 2.4 million homes in the UK in 2018 were experiencing fuel poverty, and there's an estimate that, you know, there'll be a further 200,000 as a result of the COVID situation. And, you know, in Devon's probably around about the 10 to 14% range. So these sorts of, you know, these sorts of projects which are really focusing on kind of bringing practical benefits to people in their everyday lives are really going to be important in terms of any energy transition.
Great. No, I think that's a really important point there, linking it back to what people really care about. I think ultimately is key to communicating these messages. So in order, you know, I've mentioned some big numbers. We need to generate sort of 2.5 times more electricity than we've done. And I should just note that's not all going to come within the Devon border. Obviously, we're not an island, and we are linked in with the national infrastructure, the national grid and such. So we will be sharing infrastructure with the rest of the country. So there is a proportion of our energy that will be coming from infrastructure projects such as large offshore wind farms and such that are deployed outside of the county. However, if we assume that we still need to develop large-scale renewable energy projects in Devon, which we know we do, because in order to meet those challenges of decarbonising and producing the amount of electricity that's required to do so, we know we need to deploy at scale. So what it's often, I think it's often assumed, incorrectly, it's often assumed that community energy and locally owned projects are small scale. But can any of the panel comment on the sorts of scale that the community and locally owned projects are able to deploy up to, and projects that you're aware of in the area that have been at that scale that's required?
Well, I can comment. I mean, I guess, you know, that we're talking about a range of scales. So as far as Tamar Energy Community is concerned, at the moment, you know, we have community-owned renewables on 6 roofs. We're looking to add an additional one, and it's a question of growing from there. But we do have representatives here from Yelm Community Energy, for example, who have either part or whole ownership of 1 or more solar farms, which are generating significant amounts of power. And you know, there are other examples of projects across the area, including, for example, with Tressock and some water-based projects. Again, you know, at the moment, some of these are smaller, but as we all grow in experience and there is more support for us to work together and be able to scale this up, then, you know, the limit is in many ways our ambition and our ability to collaborate and cooperate together. The other thing that I should have mentioned about Devon Energy Collective, and Doug may want to comment on this later, is that, you know, one of the ambitions is that public institutions across Devon and the local authorities may be able to buy their energy from Devon Energy Collective to retain much more of the value within the county.
Great. Would Sophie or Ian like to come in at all there?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I mean, it may not be a particularly big project, but there's a turbine. It's as you drive along the A38, people might recognise this. It's at the Marley Head Junction, and you may have noticed that. And that turbine is owned by the South Brent Community Energy Society, and they've been established for a really long time. They're an amazing, amazing group. And that small turbine has, since it was erected, has managed to generate £76,000 of grants to local community projects. So you can just see the scale of just one small turbine, what that's put back into the local economy. And the sort of things that they've given grants to include, they've put PV on village halls, LED lighting in churches, they've installed more efficient heating systems. They've also actually, because we don't own our own generation, they're our neighbouring group. And the great thing about community energy as well is all these groups, everyone works together, and you feel like you've got colleagues all across Devon, and there's space for so many more people to be involved in this sector. Just a call out for more people to get involved. But yeah, so the South Brent Community Energy Society have part funded some of our work to do community engagement work and fuel poverty work. So there's really nice kind of links between all the groups.
Great, thank you, Sophie. And Ian, I see you.
Yeah, I was going to just kind of add to that. It's a little bit, it starts off with a confession that I'm actually a resident of Cornwall, so rather than Devon. But it brings me also the opportunity to kind of reflect on the importance of what Sophie's saying there about community benefits, because we had quite a significant process of renewable energy deployment under the feed-in tariff, and it's fair to say it wasn't always harmonious, and the kind of a lot of the traditional disputes around wind energy were articulated on lots of different occasions with different developments. But kind of one of the ones that was really important in all of that was a sense that, yeah, it was the landowner and the developer who were getting all the financial benefits, perhaps with a relatively modest community benefit fund but alternative models, the more community-based model, which works more energetically to make the benefit, those financial benefit components of wind energy deployment a stronger part of the whole process, and give everybody a much greater sense of ownership, is something that I would take out as a really important lesson from Cornwall's experiences. The other one is that Kate started off by saying that kind of it's about range of technology scales, and I think that's another point that I'd really like to emphasize. One of the key elements of the interim plan is the idea of developing an energy strategy, and that's around getting a conversation, a practically minded as well as a principled conversation around what sort of technologies to deploy, at what scale, in what locations, and with what sort of models. And that's never going to be about railroading certain sets of solutions, but it's about recognizing, a lot of the context. The headline figure here was that energy contributed 62% of Devon's emissions profile. So we have to be honest in those conversations and say the ambition of net zero rests to a very large degree on the idea of what we do with our energy system into the future. But it's also about, it's about negotiation of distance, recognition of difference, recognizing views might be quite deeply divided on this, and working through all of those knotty questions together as part of a strategy. So, but also kind of always recognizing the stakes that are involved in this.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the strategy that you mentioned there is one of the key outputs that we want to see coming out of this plan is a Devon-wide action plan that will, strategy, which we would then be able to deliver on. And this would tie in all of the other requirements across Devon. So the competition for land use, it will bring in looking at, I can see again the chat, it is talking about tree planting in order for carbon capture. That's clearly a really important part of the puzzle, and it's absolutely something that's included in the plan, and that will feature within this sort of Devon-wide plan that we want to develop. The plan would also then need to work with other key stakeholders across the county, so people like Western Power Distribution, who are responsible for owning and operating our grid, working with all the local authorities and all the key actors in there. So I think that plan is absolutely crucial, and then it's crucial to deliver on that plan as well as producing it. So I think that's a really important point there, Ian. And I think I'd like to just quickly, before we move to the question and answers, I'd just like to pick my panel members' brains on what they think about behaviour change. So clearly, point 1 of the plan is to reduce the amount of electricity we use. And then point 2 is more renewables, and then to be clear that we need to use less of those renewables once we've got them. So a big behaviour change piece of work is going to have to go on alongside the technological approach that we know we need to take. So how do my panel think we go about engaging people and carrying out that piece of work around behavioural change? So I will throw that one open to the 3 of you. Feel free to shout who wants to go first. I think Kate first proposed.
It might be worth mentioning our project linked to Open LV, so open data, which we call the power in your hands, and that is about monitoring data that's coming off substation usage and being able to then show that to the community so that people are able to see patterns of usage across the day and the significant peaks that occur, particularly in the evening when electricity is most expensive. And we found that being able to represent usage data in that sort of format really helped the discussion around looking at options for time shifting or reducing energy usage at those times of day, or just looking at other ways of, for example, cooking an evening meal using a slow cooker rather than the oven, and all those kind of things. So being able to demonstrate that the impact of actions on the energy supply can really help illustrate consequences of our behaviour.
Great, thank you. Sophie, I saw you already.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, but for a long time we've all been told as individuals that we just need to switch off our lights and put things on standby, and it's not us alone. We know now, I think people are more aware now that it's not us alone that can fix this problem just by switching off our lights. And so we started a project called Net Zero Heroes, which was aimed at working in schools and giving assemblies to children and making it fun and interesting and talking about the positive future that we've got to look forward to. Out of that project, we organised an event called Ivy Ridge Futures Fair, which for anyone that knows Ivy Ridge, we don't normally have a massive turnout to events, but it was an incredible turnout and everybody was super excited, and it was a great opportunity to encourage each other. So I think that's one thing we found about the Net Zero Heroes project, is kind of people that can encourage each other and talk and share what they're already doing. It really helps to hear what other people are doing around you, the actions that people are taking. We wanted to kind of talk to people about the bigger actions as well. So switching your bank to a bank that doesn't invest in fossil fuels, which doesn't particularly involve a lifestyle change. So maybe that's one of the easiest ones to do. And things like reducing air travel and the other big actions that you need to take. But yeah, one of the nicest things about that project was that face-to-face interaction. Us as a community energy group, we're kind of bringing these big messages. We're the local people at the local level, which is another benefit of your community energy people, because they're just ordinary people from your community that we kind of talk to people and yeah, just bringing the agenda, the climate change agenda, more and more into other conversations. Like we've already mentioned, bringing it into health and social care, how it improves well-being and health, being more active as well. Yeah, there's so many benefits.
Ian, I know that.
Okay, yeah, I should keep it very brief because I don't want to restrict the amount of time for the participants question and answer, because that's really, really important part of it. I've already mentioned some of the things that I would say in this context about, making it directly relevant to people's lives, You know, I'm thinking here particularly about, at the moment, a rather cold day, houses with poor insulation, children home educating, and those sorts of things about well-being that are really relevant to people's lives. Kate's already mentioned impactive actions, but the kind of the third thing that I would draw on there is how to keep it on people's radars, make it perpetually relevant. Energy is an invisible service provided to people. It's so easy to forget it, and kind of one of the major reasons that some of our research on young people energy behavior and why people don't engage in energy saving behaviors it is because it's so easy to forget about. And so I'm not necessarily claiming I know that necessarily how to sort out that one, but kind of real sense of focus on how to make energy continually relevant to people's lives.
Great, thank you. That's great. Emily, I think we probably need to move to the questions, and hopefully we can cover a few additional points there.
Great. So I think Doug's been diligently watching the chat. So Doug, what have you found?
Yeah, hi everybody. Lots of good conversation, lots of answers being provided by the community in the chat as well. So that's really helpful. So I'll try not to go over questions that have already been answered in the chat. We've got a lot of interest in community energy. Kate, would you feel qualified to explain what the Devon Energy Collective is doing? If not, I know Peter Crone is on the call, and we could throw Peter into the deep end.
Yes, so perhaps Peter would like to just give a snapshot of
yeah, okay. Peter, are you still on the call?
I am, but I've only got a few minutes. I have to dive off the call.
That's a few minutes.
Interestingly, to talk to our colleagues in Cornwall who want to set up something rather similar to what we've already set up in Devon, which is Devon Energy Collective. So in a couple of minutes, no more, Devon Energy Collective was set up really as a result of an initiative that came out of the Devon Community Energy Network, that we were getting frustrated that the government was rowing back on all of the support mechanisms for renewables, and that there was really no subsidy for developing solar or wind or anything really in the county. And that the only way we'd be able to break through would be to do larger projects in a subsidy-free market. And that's how we really come up with the idea of forming this consortium company that included all of the Devon community energy companies working together to do larger projects, and so Devon Energy Collective came about as a result of some very kind funding sponsored by Doug at Devon County Council. We incorporated the company at the beginning of last year, about a year ago now, and we have been active. The plan is to have an initial portfolio of 100 megawatts of renewable projects, preferably in the minimum number of projects possible. So we are looking at significant projects, 40, 50 megawatts, that sort of thing, which they'll have to be in this current subsidy-free market in order to be financeable. And the idea is that Devon Energy Collective has been set up to hopefully be one of the principal vehicles for achieving the Devon Carbon Plan. And we have an ambition that wherever we have a project, and we have numbers of projects in the pipeline at the moment, so wherever we develop a project, not less than 50% of the operating profits from that project, because we're a not-for-profit organization, just like all of our members, the community energy companies. So not less than 50% of what would normally be the operating profits for that project will be ploughed back into that local community. And certainly one of the tasks that we would highlight for them, obviously it would be their choice as to how they spend the money, but one of the things that we would like to achieve is to start the deep retrofitting of Devon's, whatever it is, 60-odd thousand dwellings that will need to be retrofitted in order to make them 2050 ready and net zero. So in order for the county to actually achieve that net zero target.
That's brilliant.
That's probably enough for now.
Thank you, Peter. it's an excellent initiative. Thank you for keeping the cogs moving on it. And I know the community energy sector is very supportive of it in Devon. It's very exciting. So thank you for that. Kerry,
Yeah.
what would the role be for domestic wind energy?
Ooh, domestic wind energy.
Yeah.
What do we mean?
I think looking in the chat, I think we mean literally small wind turbines on houses. So I think the question is about how effective are they and should we be pursuing them?
Sorry, I like me being dim. Presumably we don't mean actually on houses.
I think so. So I think we're talking about chimney mounted turbines, those sorts of things. Should they be being installed alongside rooftop solar?
I mean, it really isn't something I know anything about. I presume it probably wouldn't be the most efficient way of doing things, and we'd probably be better at looking at turbines at scale, either on sort of farm scale or larger generation projects, I think. So I'd probably stick to solar panels on roofs, I think.
Okay. That was a question for Kate. So we've got the local electricity bill that's proposing that local communities could sell power to local consumers. What difference will that make to the opportunity for community energy?
Well, it would be viewed very positively by both ourselves as community energy organisations, and I think the communities living around us and living around projects. It's a question we're often asked. So if you're generating energy, can we buy that energy? Currently, it's quite challenging, and there are lots of different initiatives that are being addressed around this. And there are one or two things being done around the energy local model, and there are a few people who know quite a lot about this in Devon. But it is an area which has lots and lots of layers of challenging legislation, etc., around it that need to be overcome before there can be a significant change in that, as far as I understand.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Kate. Okay, moving topic slightly. This is probably one for you, Kerry, as well. So if we're moving towards renewable energy, how do we cope with peaks and troughs in demand from energy sources that have a variable output?
Yeah, so this is something I think I mentioned near the beginning. One of our kind of key areas, in addition to generating renewable energy, is increasing storage and flexibility on our systems. So renewable energy can sometimes generate at times when the demand isn't necessarily there. For example, it might be particularly windy or particularly sunny when we're not necessarily needing to take all of that off the grid. So storage and using time of use tariffs and things a bit more flexibly will allow us to store that energy for a time when we do require it. And people using their energy a bit more flexibly due to things like time of use tariffs can cause people to change their behaviour slightly in order to then take the electricity when it is there. So flexibility and energy storage do go hand in hand with the generation of renewable electricity.
Great, thank you, Kerry. I'll leave this one open to whoever on the panel would like to put their hand up. Potentially a two-part question. What do we need from government to help with this transition in Devon, and how might we influence them to help with that?
You go first, Kate.
I could make an initial comment, and I guess that would be that we need a government to take us seriously. I think that is becoming increasingly so, and it does help that organisations like Regen have a significant voice in community energy, and that Community Energy England is becoming increasingly strong. And it's important that there's a recognition that whilst many of us are working as volunteers or semi-volunteers, we are all very professional people, and there is a huge amount of expertise within community energy across the UK and further afield. We all work together really effectively, and We just need to get support to scale this up.
Yeah. And I think I would add to that, and I'm just about to share a link in the chat to a paper that Regen has recently published about the role of cities and regions in this. And that's particularly relevant because one of our we've got a number of key asks of government in there, and part of that is that we think that local authorities and local areas should really be empowered through providing funding and the investment and the resources required, as well as the regulations needed in order to drive that forward in the local areas. So I think it's local areas working with national government in order to define what's required for each area, because our needs here in Devon are clearly very different to somewhere much more urban, like Manchester or London, for example. So we all need slightly different things from national government, but largely all of us need to be supported through the right regulations and increased funding. So I'll just post a link to our paper on that, which has got far more information than I could cover in 30 seconds.
I will just highlight that the plan has got several actions around working with national government to get the support and the incentives that Devon needs to really be able to run with this. Yes, I probably should have mentioned that as chair of the event. There are lots of actions within the plan, exactly as Emily says, that also reflect that.
I would just add as well some about contacting your local MP and your local councillors as well, because you can use the plan and you can use the documents from Regen and other kind of environmental charities. They often have tips for how to engage people, and sometimes it can seem really scary to speak to your MP, but they just need to hear from you as who you are. You don't need to be anything other than you, and just say what matters to you. The more people they hear from, then the better. And we've had quite an effective engagement campaign with our local MP Gary Streeter, and he managed to meet up with him, a group of us community energy groups, and he said it's actually made a big difference to how he thinks about climate change. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities there to help.
Yeah, and there is an upcoming space here. I mean, currently the government is fairly obviously and understandably preoccupied with COVID, but it has set the net zero ambition at a national level. So kind of that working through channels up to the heart of central government is a really important point that Sophie's made there, in order to get the financial incentive frameworks in a way that's going to support all different types of technologies and a way that is place sensitive.
Okay, thank you all. Kerry, back to you.
Great. I think we are rapidly running out of time, so I think we'll have to wrap it up there. There is a huge amount of information and lots of questions and perhaps frustration at things that we haven't been able to cover in the discussion. Please note that, as I said, we're going to circulate that, and if you do have other questions or you have other points that you wanted to feed in to the plan is very much open for consultation. So I would encourage you to take a look at that consultation and fill that in and give us your comments at that point. That is exactly the right place to do it. We will, as I say, take this chat as sort of evidence towards the consultation response as well. So we have captured it, but if you feel very strongly or you have evidence that you'd like to input, then please make sure that you fill in that consultation. Sorry, Emily, was there another slide you wanted to share there, Emily?
I won't put the slides up again, but I think Hannah, our comms lead, has got a bit of a call to action for you all.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so as Kerry said, read the plan and give us your feedback. We really do value what you have to say and your opinions on the plan. Just a quick update on how to respond. We now have a 10-minute option for the consultation. So if you'd like to give your feedback on a broad overview of the plan, then you can do so in 10 minutes. But if you would like to give a more detailed response, then you can still do so. And that can be just on one section. For example, for the energy section, you can skip through and just give your response for that. And one final thing, we have one last webinar coming up on the 2nd of February for economy and resources. But as we said, all the recordings are available on our YouTube channel. So please check them out. Thank you very much.
Great, and I think we can put the links in the chat shortly, so that you can find that easily. Thank you for chairing, Kerry. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our panel. A really rich conversation and very hopeful about the expertise that I think we have collectively in Devon.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That's great.